guys, this is Mario again, starting my review of the X-Men film series. And of course, I'm going to be starting with the first film that was made, the 2000 film X-Men. And of course, the DVD I have has special features. I haven't watched any of them yet. It has deleted scenes, an interview with Charlie Rose, a Mutant Watch featurette, Hugh Jackman screen test, storyboards, and some trailers. Now, this movie, I guess it came out at a time when they were making comic book movies, I guess, but most of the comic book movies were either bad or they ended up being hated by people. Because think about, actually that has something to do with all through the 90s if you think about it, because the only comic book movies that I could think of off the top of my head that came out in the 90s that people liked was at least the first Ninja Turtle movie, because some people don't like the second one. I don't know why, but I like it. And of course the third one, but I don't need to get into that. That movie, The Shadow, which I haven't seen, but I understand people hate it. Of course, the three Batman movies that came out, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, and Batman and Robin, which I like the first two that I said, and the third one is a guilty pleasure for me, but not really a good movie compared to the previous ones. Spawn, which people hate, but I enjoy it. I'll get to why I enjoy it when I review that movie on down the road. I got to give it another watch. It's been a while since I've seen it. But I guess you could say it wasn't the type of comic book movies people were expecting. This movie came out, and it ushered in a new era of comic book movies. For starters, this was the first good one based off a Marvel comic, because from what I understand, most of the previous times they've tried to adapt Marvel, not good. The Fantastic Four movie they made in the 90s and the Captain America movie they made in the 90s. Not good. Now, the plot of the movie is that the United States Senate is having a hearing whether or not they're going to pass a bill that will require mutants to register with the government. You know, then people know their names and what powers they have. Now, this is where the movie becomes slightly allegorical, because you could draw allegories to it between stuff that was happening in the United States, for example, during the last 100 years, you know, stuff involving the rights of gay people, especially in California, to teach and hold jobs without being fired because of their sexual orientation, you know, the civil rights movement, whether or not people of different races can marry, and then also nowadays gay marriage, and of course in that thing it's always, you know, the arguments are always, it's against God. I mean, they're just gonna get to the children and turn them gay. I was in high school. I did not see no gay studies. There was not a book that says how to become a homosexual. Just like that, it's that same mind frame of that it's going to be dangerous. That's the reason that the Senate, of course, the senator who's leading the anti-mutant campaign is Senator Kelly. It's the reason that he is all trying to get this bill passed, because he thinks it's a danger. Saying that children should not be taught by mutants, and he lists off a whole different types of powers that he knows certain mutants have. He doesn't know the names specifically, but like one person who could walk through walls, he says, what's to stop them from robbing a bank? That is a good point. And then, of course, we've mentioned ones where they can read into the minds. Of course, we all know the ironic thing about that is the one doing the anti-legislation arguments is Jean Grey, and we all know that she, along with Professor Charles Xavier, can read minds, so it's kind of ironic that he's saying it to one who can do it. But just all of Kelly's arguments to me, if mutants really did exist like that and he tried to do that, none of them would fly. Then again, I could be wrong. We humans, we tend to fear the unusual. I mean, we feared the Elephant Man, and there's nothing wrong with him. It's just he was deformed on the outside, but inside he was articulate and was a smart man. Now, when it kind of looks like the Senate is probably going to vote yes, and we find out Magneto, who Eric Lenscher is his real name, he is coming up with a plan to stop this. And of course, the movie opens with part of his childhood where he's in a Nazi concentration camp. So with that, you can actually see Magneto's point of view. I mean, the Nazis, they started rounding up the Jews, blaming them for all their troubles. It started with World War I and concluded with the Reichstag fire, which basically, from what we know nowadays, was Hitler's idea to start that fire. And then blame it on the Jews. But he started rounding up, like all I said, all the Jews in the Third Reich were rounded up, put in camps, and Eric is one of them. So he has actually lived through something like this, a witch hunt, I guess you could say. And then, of course, he lived in, I think, if I remember correctly, he's alive during the McCarthy things in the 50s. I don't know if he's in the timeline he's in America or not, but it's very similar stuff. Only people weren't killed; they were just blacklisted. And then, of course, now this. And one of the first things he says when we see him as an adult, he's like, "I've heard these arguments before, Charles. Things are different there. Mankind has evolved into us." Now, of course, Eric is right. Those arguments, they're very similar. Worded differently, they're basically the same. We need to throw them out in the open because they are different. That's the whole argument. Just because a person's different does not give you the right to go out and mob them. I mean, this intolerant thing is prevalent throughout all three movies, but it's mostly seen in this one and the third one, because the second one only has it in the background. It's at the forefront of this one and then the third one. Now, Magneto's plan is to capture this one mutant who we know named Rogue, and using her power, give her his power of magnetism, put her in this machine that can create artificial mutations. Of course, I like it first, though. It makes it look like he's after Wolverine, which I have to say, casting Hugh Jackman as Wolverine was brilliant casting. The only other movie besides the X-Men movies that I've seen him in that I like him in is Van Helsing, although I would say that's kind of a guilty pleasure now that I think about it, but then again I have to give it another watch to see if it would be guilty pleasure, a movie I actually fully do like. But I think I'm probably one of the only few people who likes that movie. But, like I said, perfect casting. And from what from some of the interview stuff I have watched, this is one of his favorite X-Men characters, and he actually wanted in the Origin movie for him to be more badass, but I'll get to that when I get to X-Men Origins Wolverine. Now, the thing is, as we are introduced to Wolverine in this movie, he has the adamantium claws already, and they slowly begin to show that he was experimented on because he was a mutant. His origins aren't really touched on until the second movie, and I'll get to that later, but we see the beginning of that, and by the end of the movie, he actually wants to go out and find a little bit about him. And of course, Professor Xavier agrees to help him figure it out. Now, the main X-Men of this movie, the good mutants are Professor Xavier, Wolverine, Rogue, Iceman, I guess is like a minor one, along with Pyro. And of course Cyclops, which Cyclops and Wolverine have kind of start their little rivalry that happens throughout the film series in this movie, which is kind of which it's over as the films go on. It's over Jean's affections, which they go more into it in the next movie, but you can see the beginning of it here. Let's off the top of my head, who else? That's about it. That's all the main one in this movie. And of course the main villains, of course, Magneto's the boss, and of course Mystique. I know in the comics she's not a member of the Brotherhood, but having her a member of the Brotherhood I don't have a problem with. And having her a nudist kind of does make sense, as we find out in the new movie why she does that, but it kind of makes sense. Makes it easier to transform, I guess, even though she can replicate clothes, apparently. And then, of course, Sabretooth is the muscle, which Tyler Mane, he plays Sabretooth. Now, I don't know if many people notice, but Tyler Mane used to be a professional wrestler. Now, out of the X-Men movies, this is probably my second favorite, because the best one, in my opinion, is the second one. And as I mentioned earlier, this movie is what started the comic book movie revival of the 2000s. Because it was starting to wind down after Batman and Robin. But this movie was a hit both critically and financially. So because of that, they started to make more of it. And this is even parodied a little bit in Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back. When X-Men hit at the box office, all the studios started buying up all the comic book related material they could get their greedy little hands on. Which is, if you think about it, it's true, because look at all the comic movies that have come out since then. We got Daredevil, Elektra, we got X-Men 2, X-Men The Last Stand, X-Men Origins Wolverine, X-Men First Class, the revival of the Batman franchise with Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. We got Superman Returns, and of course the new one that's going to be coming out soon, The Man of Steel. Okay, live action. We had that new Ninja Turtle movie. Remember, I'm just thinking of them off the top of my head. So If I miss any, write them in the comment section. And of course, there's animated revivals. You know that show X-Men. Oh yeah, now I remember a couple more. All those other Marvel movies tying into the Avengers. We wouldn't have those without this movie. And of course, because a lot of those became hits, that's the reason I think Disney bought Marvel, because they saw that there was going to be a lot of money invested in the future. They'd get back more than their share on the investment. Now, the acting in the movie, I have to say, is pretty good, especially from the main characters, obviously. Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier is perfect casting, in my opinion. I mean, for one, he's already bald, but you can really see the character in him. Ian McKellen as Magneto, perfect casting as well. Even though he's not young and the helmet doesn't look exactly like it does in the comics, it's a good interpretation of it, in my opinion. And also, from this movie, you can see why Ian McKellen is an Oscar-nominated actor. Because his performance in this movie is just very good, and he has a lot of good lines. You homo sapiens and your guns. That's the one thing. Going with the mutation thing, he calls normal humans homo sapiens, which they kind of explain that a little bit in the new movie, but I'll get to that when I review the new movie. Now, Rogue, the actress that they got, I don't know her name off the top of my head. Let me see if I can find it on here. Dang it. Oh man, I have the page up. I could just use the page. Okay, Anna Paquin as Rogue, I thought was a good casting choice because she does pretty good. That's the only movie I know her from now. Now, making Rogue a teenager, I think that might have turned some people off, but I have no problem with it because remember, I've never read the comics. The only X-Men related comic I've ever read was that one, Wolverine and the Punisher, which I'd actually love to see them do a Marvel animated movie of that, because that was a kick-ass three-parter. Other than that little comic, the only thing I have to go by is the animated series, which, if you see my intro, that's where I got the music from. James Marsden as Scott Summers, he does a pretty good job, and you really think he's a dick when it comes to Wolverine. I mean, that's even how they tell Wolverine is Wolverine later in the movie. You stop. How do I know it's you? You're a dick. Fair enough. Or he says okay or something. And then Famke Janssen is Jean Grey, another good casting choice. And then of course, Bruce Davison, the guy who plays Senator Kelly, he really makes you hate that senator's guts. He makes you want to go. He makes you want to go in there and filibuster the crap out of his face. Yeah, how's this for a filibuster? Yeah, non-stop filibuster pound out. Then of course Rebecca Romijn Stamos, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, is Mystique. She does a very good job too. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, she's not a member of the Brotherhood in the comics, but I have no problem with her being included. And of course, the minor characters, they do okay. Now, the direction is pretty good. The effects are good, and I have to say that was probably what some comic fans were worrying about, that the effects were going to be crap like in the two movies I mentioned earlier. But the effects are actually pretty damn good, and they still hold up. 11 years later, they still hold up very well. And I do like the choreography and the fight scenes. Anyway, I give X-Men a 5 out of 5, because I can't really think of anything wrong with the movie. Other than little nitpicking things, like the X-Men not wearing the uniforms, but come on, if they're a team, they probably in real life would have matching uniforms. So for them all having matching uniforms, I have no problem with. Oh yeah, it reminds me of another one. Getting Halle Berry as Storm was a good idea. Just making sure Jeff's not here, because he'd probably be stopping to watch that certain part of the movie.